Hello everyone, this is AndresRestart, and this time we are talking about even more changes we could be seeing in The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time remake. Many people believe this remake is happening, myself included. We'll see. There is a debate as to how ambitious this remake is going to be. We're not entirely sure, but even if this is more of a simple remake, there's still some substantial changes we've noticed when playing through the beginning parts of Ocarina of Time. And so we've already done a few different installments, this being the 4th installment, and what I'm going to be doing is going through Zora's Domain, Lord Jabu-Jabu, and also the events that immediately transpire afterwards once we bring all 3 spiritual stones to the Temple of Time. There's actually quite a bit that can be changed here that I find extremely interesting, and so that's what we're diving into today. All I ask is that you hear me out, listen through until the end of the video, and let me know what you think at the end in the comments below. Now, before diving into all the potential changes here, I do want to mention this kind of a conversation or debate that is being had right now, because recently we got the official confirmation of Star Fox, which is in part a remake of Star Fox 64, and this confirmation does confirm a big leak that also includes Ocarina of Time remake happening for later this year, but people look at this new Star Fox title and think it suggests different things. I've looked at it and I think it suggests some pretty exciting things and a new standard of remake for Nintendo, and others look at it and think, there's no way Nintendo's going to do much more than this. And so I'll tell you, assuming Nintendo matches the exact same level of effort for Ocarina of Time as they're doing for Star Fox here, and I think you can make an argument they'll likely put even more, but assuming they put in the same amount of effort, I think there's still a substantial amount of things to consider here. What we've seen with Star Fox has so much more detail. It's not just made to look like a modern game, there's a lot more Easter eggs and different things that have been changed and adjusted around with these modern visuals. Like, you look at the R-Wing and all the extra details you see there, there's a lot of lore implications, and for Zelda fans, if there's a lot of details and adjustments made to the visuals with the overall Zelda lore in mind, then there's actually a lot more to consider here. And then we also think about how they're adding all these new cutscenes in between for all the briefings, where there's a lot more character development and things going on. That's telling a lot more story. That's expanding the tale. So from a story perspective, from a details perspective, Star Fox is actually a lot more than Star Fox 64. And if they were to be doing that for Ocarina of Time, there's so much to consider for that, and I'm sure many of you who look into Zelda lore or Zelda timeline stuff or Zelda theory stuff will easily understand just how much this would actually bring to the series. But this Star Fox release is actually even more than that, because there's also a brand new multiplayer mode and a brand new challenge mode, things that were not available in the original. So to say that this is a carbon copy that doesn't have any changes, I don't think that's fair. There's even a lot of different control variations, and then there's all the game chat stuff that matches your facial expressions. This is not a one-to-one remake. The campaign, structurally, the levels, sure, but there's so much more to it. So even if the Ocarina of Time remake is essentially the same level of effort here, it would still be a very big deal in my opinion. But as I alluded to earlier, there's even the possibility that perhaps they could go a step further. But getting back to where we left off, Kapora Gabora leaves us at Kakariko Village after helping us descend down Death Mountain quickly. And in this moment, when I'm atop these buildings, I consider the value of them integrating gliding in this game. Yes, the glider was introduced in Breath of the Wild, and it was also heavily used in Tears of the Kingdom, but technically there was even gliding in the Wind Waker with the Korok leaf. I don't think it's completely out of the realm of possibility where they might give us a few different abilities. Of course, this is assuming they're making this a very ambitious remake, and we could do things like gliding around the environment if the environment has been expanded upon. However, thinking it through more so, I don't know if they would be giving us the ability to glide this early on, but I'll be circling back to that towards the end of this video. But the first thing I want to do after getting the Goron's Ruby is check back in at Hyrule Castle. I want to get an update with Princess Zelda. I feel like that's the natural thing you want to do. You want to see what's going on with her, how she responds to you getting that next stone. And so that's where I head, back to Hyrule Castle. And on the way there, now that I have access to bombs, I find another fairy's fountain. And this brings me to a point I didn't get to last time, but I would like to address, just thinking about what they could do to the fairy's fountains with significantly improved visuals. Like, these environments are going to look totally different here. Like, when I look at the floor, there are parts that almost look like sand, but when you walk over them, they don't feel or sound like sand. So with modern visuals, we're going to see what that is supposed to be. Is it sand? Is it concrete? How will that change? How will the room look? I'm very excited to see what they do here. There's a lot they can do with these environments visually, and I think it could look fantastic. If you're curious on my thoughts about how they'll handle the designs for the Great Fairies, you're probably going to want to watch the prior installment where I focus on Death Mountain. But when you do go back to Hyrule Castle and you visit Princess Zelda, not much happens, not much changes. There isn't really anything going on here, and I think this is an interesting thing to consider. I think they actually should do something to give us more reason to visit again. And I think this is important, because if you just kind of go straight to Zora's Domain, which you could do, especially if you know what's going on, you're not going to actually have that much interactions with Princess Zelda before things take a significant shift in the next big section of the game. And I think it's important to have multiple interactions with this character because of how important she is. So I think it actually would be valuable to perhaps give us some reason to circle back to Hyrule Castle, and maybe at least add a little bit more dialogue there. We have entertained the idea that maybe they'll show you how Impa guides you back out of Hyrule Castle so you can explore a little bit more of Hyrule Castle. Perhaps they can play around with that a little bit more. Again, this is assuming they're getting extra ambitious here with changes, but that's just something I noticed, an opportunity to perhaps give us a little bit more characterization and interesting moments with Princess Zelda. If you're trying to figure out how to get to Zora's Domain or what to do next, one of the avenues for figuring out what to do next is by speaking with Saria by playing her song. And I think this is an interesting opportunity to add some more cool character moments here, some more fun events. Because every time you play this song, you actually have a conversation with Saria, but maybe they could mix up the text here, maybe they could make it more interesting, offer more variations, and actually have it be voice acted. And that way it just becomes a fun experience to play Saria's song and see what sort of advice she's going to give you or how she's going to respond to different situations you're in throughout the game. But you know, on my way to Zora's Domain, again, I get attacked by the Stall Children. They come out at night on Hyrule Field. And I just kind of have this thought, like, why are they there? What's the backstory here? So if there could be some sort of explanation that at some point that would be cool. Perhaps they could even have some sort of quest where you find the source of the Stall Children. That would be extremely interesting, and it's one more opportunity to expand on what they could do if they were to make this a more ambitious remake. But now finally, getting back to our venture to Zora's Domain. I actually really like how it's handled from this point. Maybe they expand on the map a little bit here, but the overall challenge and the platforming that needs to be done to get to that point, maybe they could play around with more modern platforming options, like if they do give Link a manual jump now. But overall, I think this could stay relatively the same. Maybe a little bit larger in scale, but ultimately about the same I think would be fine. But when we get to the entrance, there's like this block you step on and you can't really make out any detail, and there's already a Triforce. So in the remake, I'm hoping to see something a bit more detailed there. That would be nice. However, once you get inside Zora's Domain, and you just kind of look at the environment, I actually think it's really cool what they tried to pull off back then. How they had like this water effect where you can see the water reflecting on the rock surfaces of the walls and the ceilings. Now back then, there was a lot of visual limitations, and the rock walls are very bland and blurry and do not look that visually appealing, yet they still managed to pull off this effect. I have to think that with the remake, they could do a dramatic visual overhaul here, and this is going to look beautiful, with all sorts of cool water graphical effects and reflections and things of that nature that are just going to look amazing. But here's something else to consider when going back to this remake: the designs of the Zoras. Because in modern Zelda games, the designs of the Zoras have changed dramatically in comparison to how they used to be. What direction are they going to choose? Are they going to make Zoras look how they look in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, where you have a different colored Zoras and some of them looking more like fishes or sharks or what have you? Or are they going to all kind of have the same type of visual design, where they're mostly white with like blue scales and look something along those lines? It's going to be interesting to see what choice they make here, but this is a very likely potential big change in the remake. Now, this is a simple little detail, but when you find the message from Princess Ruto in the bottle in Lake Hylia, it's referenced as an empty bottle, even though technically it's not an empty bottle. I think there's probably going to be a change where they don't reference empty bottles as empty bottles, but bottles, where they can be empty and then you can put things in them. There's probably going to be a lot of dialogues and text boxes that are going to be adjusted to make more sense. Which brings me to another thing about Lake Hylia. You're gonna visit the fishing hole, and in there's mention of the Rumble Pack. They're probably not gonna mention that in the remake. Rumbling is just such a norm standard now. But you know, there are new gimmicks now, like things you could do with motion controls or mouse controls, and so they might want to play around with some of those things for the fishing in Ocarina of Time, and maybe they'll make mention of that instead of rumbling. And this is just something I really appreciated even about Ocarina of Time back in the day. You were able to kind of skip and speed through a lot of tutorial text. That should still be a thing. Of course, if it's something that has important story details, then that should kind of stick with the pace as it does in the original, actually, for the most part. Now, getting back to Zora's Domain, because there is kind of like a portal between Lake Hylia and Zora's Domain, I did have a thought that they could kind of have like this mini game or something where you're literally just kind of swimming through this channel that takes you quickly to Lake Hylia, but I decided it would just make more sense to just not change these portals. These portals are good for the experience of Ocarina of Time because they allow you to get to different points on the map that are vastly separated rather quickly. Sometimes less is more, and I think this would be one of those things. You don't want them to remake everything just for the sake of making the game feel bigger, because after a certain point, then you're just kind of bloating things. So some restraint I think would actually be important here. Some other quality of life changes that come to mind as I've been kind of venturing through this section of the game: don't waste rupee chests. This is a change they made in more modern Zelda games, but if you get a chest that has rupees in it, and you have a full wallet, then just leave the rupee in there and you can come back to it later. And with that in mind, also, the map system, perhaps they could actually have like a quest menu, which we started to see in Majora's Mask moving forward. Perhaps they could actually have like a quest menu where you can kind of keep track of your main missions and your side missions, your side quests and all, but also being able to keep track of chests that you've left behind on the map, or even having little markers or beacons you can set. A lot of the changes we've seen in modern Zelda games, I want to see that in this remake as well. Now, in order to get past Zora's Domain and get into Lord Jabu-Jabu, you do need to collect a fish. And so this brings me to changes we could see with the fishes in the game, and I actually think there's going to be changes. I'm not just talking about fishes in the fishing hole, which already have some variation, and they can probably definitely build on that too. But I'm just talking about like fishes you can find in a pond, like in Zora's Domain. They all look the same. I think considering modern Zelda games, they can probably change that up, put in different kinds of colored fishes, perhaps even different breeds. They can just sort of find out there. And when you do catch them in a bottle, I want to actually be able to see the fishes in the bottle. Or if when you catch a fairy, anything you catch in a bottle should actually be visible. And so that's something I expect to see in this remake, regardless of how ambitious it is. Now, I didn't mention, but there is another hurdle. You have to get past King Zora. And when you do get past King Zora, there's this scene that plays where he just moves very slowly, squeaking. And it's a very, very long scene. I understand they do it for some humor, and I'm not saying they can't find a way to still make it humorous. Perhaps it could still be humorous and be shorter. Maybe they change what happens. Maybe he falls over or something. But I do think they need to speed up this scene. It's a little bit too much. So that's something that should be adjusted upon. Now, getting before Lord Jabu-Jabu, this big fish, this big whale, there's a few different things I consider here. And I've always had this thought, because when you go back later, he's not there, eventually later on into the game, and I wonder, how does this big fish even get out of there? Well, given that he's a whale, you would think that he has a connection to the ocean. Show that connection. There's no real visual depiction of that. You don't see any actual exit way here, so I want to see that depicted. I'm not saying you can actually get to the ocean, but show in the background, show in the setting you're in, where you can see the ocean off into the distance, where you could see that they can make some sort of subtle shift where Lord Jabu-Jabu could swim out if needed. This would be really helpful for the immersion, in my opinion. Now, on the note of immersion, something else that I find interesting is that when you slash at Lord Jabu-Jabu and your sword hits him, it's almost like hitting like a rock or metal wall. I don't think it should work that way in the remake. I think, like most characters, he should be impervious to damage. Maybe your sword bounces off, but it doesn't clank like metal or rock, but something more softer or rubbery. Or perhaps Jabu-Jabu could even be a bit more responsive. Like, you see him and he just kind of blinks and you could tell he's breathing and making some noises, but there isn't that much there. You're not even sure if he's sentient or not. So it would be interesting if they made him more lively, and I also consider, will they have him talk? We've seen this character, or different versions of this character in different Zelda games, talk. So will Lord Jabu-Jabu actually have some level of intelligence here where there could be conversation? Maybe this conversation could take place after you get through this dungeon where his problems are cured or resolved. Or maybe there's something else they could add extra that kind of tells you a little bit more about what's going on within him. Now, within this dungeon, inside Lord Jabu-Jabu, like the other child dungeons, I'm not expecting substantial changes here, but there are some things. Like, there are sections later on, once you have the boomerang, where the hallways are very narrow. And this is actually a nice, challenging part to the game, because since the hallways are so narrow, and the floors and walls are forcing you to kind of be constantly moving with the enemies, yeah, it can be challenging, but it also gets kind of annoying from a camera perspective. So I do think that maybe they shouldn't be as narrow, or they should adjust how the camera works a little bit so that's a bit more comfortable. I'm not saying take away from the challenge, but there's good challenge and then there's challenge because the game isn't working right. But you know, something else that is frustrating about this section of the game, sometimes when you go into certain rooms and you leave Princess Ruto behind, she's nowhere nearby afterwards. So that should be adjusted upon. But I actually wouldn't even necessarily mind if she was away, but there was a reasoning behind that and it was built into the experience. Like, Princess Ruto is seeking her stone, and she's also a little bit of a brat. There are some weird behavioral issues there, in a funny, cute way, but they're still there. And so maybe play around with that a little bit more. Maybe she gets tired of Link after a little while, and so she gives up on him and she goes searching elsewhere, and then you have to go and find her again, and then save her again. Maybe the enemies inside Lord Jabu-Jabu are an actual threat to her, and you have to actually go save her and protect her. If there's a little bit of that dynamic there, that could actually change a lot of how this dungeon would work and could make it a bit more involved. And then there's also a little bit of story implication here as well. If there is like this chase for Princess Ruto, or there's a bit more dialogue here where Princess Ruto explains a little bit more of the importance of the stone. She does mention the connection with her mother, but if she also mentions how these enemies are also trying to get the stone, that helps to build a little bit more about what's going on with the importance of these spiritual stones and how Ganon's forces are trying to acquire it for a particular reason. And so there's some value that I think that could be added there. Other little things I noticed in this section of the game though, because there are certain rooms where there are a lot of enemies on screen, like with all these bubbles, every time you target a bubble with the boomerang, Navi speaks. Every single time. I kind of think this should be balanced out a little bit. I think Navi is an important character. I think Navi should have voice acting, as we've talked about in prior installments, but I think they should make her less annoying. Her being annoying was kind of like a known common thing from the original release, but I don't think that should be the case this time around. We were a lot more forgiving back in the day, back in 1998 with our 3D games. I don't think we're so forgiving now. Things like this should be adjusted upon. Another thing that should be adjusted upon is the boomerang and how it hits things. If you miss a target, you might end up just going straight into the wall, and the boomerang is continuing its animation through the wall, which doesn't make any sense. In this modern version, I would imagine that boomerang would work like modern boomerangs in Zelda, where if it hits something, it bounces back or it stops. I don't think you're gonna have to pick up the boomerang in this game like Breath and Tears, because it's not an expendable item. It's an item you can use continuously throughout the adventure, but it being able to bounce back immediately if you hit a wall just makes a lot more sense. Now, in the boss fight for this area, Baronade, there's some huge opportunities here, even throughout the entire dungeon, because electricity is a common element. Electricity, when you see it, there's a light there, and with these modern visuals, they could do a lot to make this look way, way cooler. So there's some interesting visual opportunities here that I hope they take advantage of, and I expect they will. But upon acquiring the final spiritual stone, and you make your way towards Hyrule Castle, this is when one of the big moments of the game happens, where Zelda and Sheik run away, and Ganondorf is chasing after them, but you meet Ganondorf, you apprehend him. It's such a cool moment, and I can't wait to see how they're going to realize this epic moment in this modern remake. But in this epic moment, Link's expressions, his facial expressions, are very limited. And facial expressions have gotten better in the Zelda games since. It's something I expect would definitely be dramatically better in this remake here to really help sell the scene. So that's going to be nice to see. Something else I wonder about, though, that sort of occurred to me when I was diving in to get the Ocarina. The diving mechanics are a little weird because you can press the dive button to go straight down, but you can't really move around that much underwater when you're there. I think this should be adjusted upon, or they just completely change around how they handle diving. Although I don't necessarily mind how it works, I just think you should have a little bit more movement options when you're actually diving down. Now, when you get into Castletown, there are people that you talk to that make mention of this event, but I want a little bit more. Like the moment you get through the drawbridge, the guard that's right there, that was only just a few feet away from you, where this interaction took place between you and Ganondorf, maybe, like, he could actually say something that reflects that. Like, he's acting like this is just a normal day. The guards in Castletown, there's not that many of them, they're not responsive to this event. Some of the people are, but that's it. However, it doesn't feel like in Castletown anything bad has happened. You only notice when you speak to these NPCs and there's some dialogue there. There should be a noticeable shift in how people are acting in Castletown themselves. Like, you should be actually able to see that people are worried. Maybe there's actual visual changes that show there is a chase. Maybe there's some destruction. Like when you go to Hyrule Castle, yeah, there's more defense now. You can see that at least for that part, they showed the change. But when you think it through, how did Princess Zelda and Sheik get through and Ganondorf follows soon after without there being some sort of destruction? Like the gate that's there that the guard could open up to let you through, he won't let you through now, but the gate is still completely fine and totally intact. How does that make sense if there was this chase here? They all got through. It would make sense if the gate was destroyed. At this point, Ganondorf has already made it clear that he's not on the side of the people of Hyrule, so everyone at Hyrule Castle should know that. So yeah, I think there's actually a lot of environmental changes, and the way the people of Castletown and the guards should be adjusted upon in this remake during this big moment. Now, getting into the Temple of Time, once you place the spiritual stones and you enter that room with the Master Sword, this is such a big, iconic moment. I'm just thinking about how this will be visually redone. It'll be more colorful, more vibrant. You'll see dust particles in the air as the light shines through that one soul window. Maybe there'll be more windows. But it's just interesting to think about what they might change to represent this important moment, arguably maybe one of the most important moments in Zelda history here. So I'm excited to see it. But when you get to this point, when you get to the Master Sword and you pull it out, there's this scene that plays where Ganondorf talks about having been able to get into the Sacred Realm, and he acquires the Triforce, or at least part of it. The way the Sacred Realm is depicted is very ambiguous. Maybe they stick with this ambiguity, but myself, when I played this younger, even a few years later, I kind of always had questions about what is going on with this Sacred Realm. It would be nice to see them address that to some extent here with a little bit less ambiguity, in my opinion. But soon after, you have this conversation in this Chamber of the Sages with Rauru, the Sage of Light, and he makes mention of a Temple of Light, which is not the exact same thing as the Temple of Time, and he gives you the Light Medallion, and he makes mention that he's adding his power to yours. And I find this moment extremely interesting, because we do know that at one point in development for Ocarina of Time, the medallions, the 6 medallions you collect, were supposed to give you powers. They're just essentially keys now and plot devices in the final version of the original Ocarina of Time. If they are going for the more ambitious route here and making some changes to how Ocarina of Time actually works, I think it'd be very cool if the medallions offered you powers. And so I mentioned earlier how maybe there could be some gliding. Maybe one of the medallions would give you this ability. I don't think it would be the light medallion though. What power could the light medallion offer? Keep it simple. Light. Being able to light areas. Maybe they could even make this shift where Rauru works with you in a new dungeon. If there's going to be a new dungeon they add to Ocarina of Time in this remake, I think it would be at this point, because you're just given a medallion with no actual challenge there. But it makes sense for there to be some sort of challenge for Link. He's now become an adult, but he hasn't tested out his new body. So adding some sort of light temple dungeon where maybe Rauru works alongside of you to help train you up and make sure you're ready in your adult form, it's a perfect plot device, a perfect explanation to add in a dungeon here, and perhaps these powers of Rauru that are assisting you have to do with lighting the environment in dark places, which could be a cool little power that you can keep with you once you're awarded the light medallion. That's just an idea, again, if they go extra ambitious here, which is not guaranteed. But something that I think will be adjusted upon regardless is what happens immediately afterwards, when you meet Sheik. Sheik talks about being from the Sheikah, and so there's opportunity here to expand on Sheikah lore and history, and that part's interesting. But even just like the voice, I assume this would also be voice acted, this would be an important scene. How are they going to handle the voice? I imagine the voice will be handled where the voice would be androgynous. And so that's going to be cool to see how Sheik is handled, because Sheik's identity is extremely important here. But also Link, moving forward, is going to be talking to this character throughout his adventure, and how they handle that, how they handle these moments, it needs to be special. But that wraps up all my thoughts on changes we could see throughout Ocarina of Time for this section of the game. What do you all think though? What might we see changed in Zora's Domain, Lord Jabu-Jabu, and the events that transpire around the Temple of Time at this point? Tell me in the comments below. This is AndresRestart, and if you've gone this far and find yourself enjoying the video, I would very much appreciate your subscription, assuming you haven't done so already. But I'll see you all really soon. Take care. Bye.